Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Screen Society podcast, a podcast that covers all things TV, movies, and everything in between. I'm your host, Logan, and today we are talking about Scrubs. It is back on TV for the first time since 2009 when we had if you count season 9, I guess it would be further in. I think it's 2010 is when season 9 technically ended. And I know a lot of people who love Scrubs like myself kind of discount that season. And Bill Lawrence has even come out and said that season 9 is not really relevant at all to what we are currently experiencing in this new form of Scrubs 2.0, season 1 on ABC, whatever you're calling it. Season 10, I'm sure is fine. And I can't wait to dive into this because this is easily one of my favorite shows that I've ever watched. And I'm so happy that we are now 16 years later picking back up with some of the same characters that we had in the original, which aired back in 2001. It was October 2nd, 2001 when Scrubs first aired. That was season 1, episode 1, called My First Day. 3 interns, Turk, JD, and Elliot, enter Sacred Heart and run up against quite a crew and cast of characters back in 2001. And I'm sure that we will get many cameos. We've already gotten a couple in the first 2 episodes of season 10, season 1, episode 1, whatever you're calling it. And we'll talk a little bit about those because those were just brilliantly placed. And I'm very excited that we got some of those cameos right out of the gate. Let's jump into it, though. This is going to be so exciting for me because while I was very hesitant about this when this news first broke that Scrubs was doing a revival, I think that most people that love this show and most people that have loved shows that have tried the reboot are very hesitant on whether they really want this to happen or not. I think the initial reaction is usually excitement because you're excited about these characters returning to television. But I also think that there is a ton of hesitancy because you don't want it to ruin the show. And I know there was a very small gap in between when they ended season 8 and started season 9 and returned some of these characters. And most of that core character and cast did appear in season 9 and it did not go well. And then they started to kind of dip off because it was going to be more focused on the new interns that they were trying to bring in, and it flopped completely. It is one of the worst, I think, spinoff type shows that I've ever seen. And so I really was not happy with the fact that they tried season 9. So then when they were like, you know what, we're going to try this again, but we're going to do this 16 years later in 2026. We're going to bring back Scrubs with the main trio that we really began this show with, and we're going to start to tell a different story in a new era of these characters' lives. And we're going to try to do this without some of the fan favorites that we have not seen yet so far in the new reboot. There are rumors that there are going to be cameos from everybody at some point, they hope. Really, the only one that I've seen that has not been confirmed that they will be making a return, and I don't know if it's because of his age or just where he is in his life, but Ken Jenkins, who played Dr. Bob Kelso in the original, has not been confirmed to come back yet. I think he's 86, so he is much older. But I could see maybe a point where, in the next, and he's, from what I've heard, he is not in season 1, and neither is the guy that played Ted. What is his name? Hold on, I'm looking him up because I just closed IMDb and I just had it where I was looking at the 2001 series. But the guy that plays Ted Buckland, I don't think have been confirmed for Sam Lloyd. I don't think has been confirmed for this season of the reboot. But we got Neil Flynn, who's also been confirmed, and Krista Miller, who's been confirmed to return in season 1. So we get the janitor back at some point. We're eventually going to get why am I blanking? I blanked right on her name as I was getting ready to talk about Jordan from who is played by Krista Miller, who is Dr. Cox's ex-wife. So we will see how they return and what they are in this show. I'm sure we'll get some of the kids returning as well. But Scrubs ended, if you remember, if you call back to season 8 of Scrubs, you do get a flash forward of JD, what he thinks life is, and Turk and Carla's life with their family, and JD and Elliot with their family. And again, we leave off with JD living the ideal life because of his daydream. His flash forwards show a perfect life, and one of the most powerful finales I think I've ever watched because of the flash forwards and what JD experiences in those. And a lot of that doesn't happen. And some people had some beef with this new revival right off the bat because we learned something about JD and another character that I think set people off a little bit. But I think once you start to understand why they did this, and if you've gone back and rewatched season 1 through 8, I think it's fitting for how those characters existed in that show. I think it's pretty fitting of what happens with their relationship as we pick back up with them 16 years later. Because this show is 16 years later, I mean, we last saw these people mostly in 2009, but 2010 as well, with season 9 existing. There has been a lot of things that have changed in television. There's been a lot of things that have changed in the world. I think we've become much more comfortable with the way we talk about things, whether that be race, sexual identity. We talk about best friends. We've talked a lot about just kind of the social impacts of different things. We are more focused on what is truly harming people in the healthcare system. Is not necessarily, while yes, you're up against cancer and disease that can cause death, you're also up against society and how they view and how healthcare is in 2026. It's very, very expensive, most expensive it's ever been. And so they're trying to tackle all of these new social issues, and it is quite a time jump from what you had in 2010 and what was acceptable to talk about on television to now 15, 16 years later, where things have changed drastically. When they were filming this and when they're talking about things, we're going to get into a lot of heavy things, I think. And we do with episode 2, and we're going to be talking about episode 1 and 2 because it was a 2-episode premiere on Thursday night, Wednesday night, February 25th was when these 2 episodes premiered. But we've got to hit it. I mean, we've really got to talk about what these characters experienced back then and now, because I think it brings up some really interesting things. And I think Bill Lawrence was very upfront about the fact that he knows that some of the things written and said during the original Scrubs, and especially with the newer generations going back and now watching it, that there are some things on there that are unacceptable, that are not things that maybe they should have covered in that kind of light. And I think that there was a lot of that's just a fear of different things that you experienced back then that now is much more accepted around the world. And so we're going to dive into those as well. We're not going to really avoid any of those conversations because I think it is something that has become quite a conversation when we're talking about this show. And I think it's great that they're able to hit this head on, and they're not afraid to tackle some of the things that maybe they did back in the series before that they're not necessarily proud of, but they want to right a wrong in a way in these new seasons that are coming for Scrubs. So we're into it. Episode 1, My Return, aired on Wednesday, February 25th. I want to make sure that was Wednesday. I keep saying Thursday. Yes, it was Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. Episode 1 and 2 of the new season dropped. My Return is this first episode that we're going to talk about. John J.D. Dorian unexpectedly finds himself back at Sacred Heart, reuniting him with new and old faces. Zach Braff directed it. We had Asim Batra as a writer, Tim Hobart, and Christopher Edens. And we get the return of Zach Braff, Sarah Chalk, Donald Faison, John C. McGinley, Judy Reyes, all return and reprise their roles. We also get Robert Macchio, who was the Todd, and Hooch, we get a Hooch appearance, which was so cool. Phil Lewis is back as Hooch. And one of my favorite running gags, I've gone back and I'm still rewatching. I'm catching up. I've seen this show about 100 times, but I'm going back and catching up and doing a rewatch because I haven't actually watched this show probably since the beginning of college. It's been a long time since I've revisited Scrubs. Obviously, I've seen it on and off clips and stuff like that. And especially as the reboot's gotten closer and closer, I've seen clips and I've gone back and watched some clips of this show just because it was one of my favorite. I would say Home Improvement, this, and Friends is all I watched throughout high school and college. So this is a lot of fun for me, and I got emotional multiple times throughout the episode, and as I think about it here, I'm getting a little bit emotional. So it's just one of those shows that meant so much to me growing up, and I relate to this so much in the show and some of the jokes that are said. And I just think it's such a cool moment to go back and revisit these characters. And I hope that we can get multiple seasons of these. Hell, let's go 8 seasons with this one too. I'm so excited Scrubs is back. But Sacred Heart, 16 years later, a lot has changed. And again, we get a first scene that I thought was interesting because I think that they knew going into this there were going to be a lot of people that were very hesitant about going back and viewing this because reboots and revivals have just not gone well. I mean, I'm trying to think of maybe some TV shows that have done well or have been successful with their reboots, and I really cannot think of any really. Like, I mean, I know that Frasier has tried it. I know Will and Grace tried it. And those fell pretty flat. I'm trying to think of other reboots and stuff. Malcolm in the Middle is getting ready to come out, but it looks good actually. So I'm pretty excited about that. But there have been multiple attempts. Even the season 9 was more of a spinoff, I guess, but it was kind of a revival to try to keep the show going, and it fell completely on its face. I think the biggest thing that you have here is that you have taken 16 years. That's an advantage, I will say. I think that, and even though Frasier, and I know some people did like the Frasier revival, and some of them did like the Will and Grace revival, but I think that this show has a chance to be a really successful show, and so far the reviews for season 1 have been through the roof over on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, and just the overall buzz because of the way that it feels. I think the biggest thing is you got to try to rekindle a feeling of a show, and that can be very tough because times have changed, things have changed, and the actors and actresses have changed, and I think sometimes they have a hard time getting back into those characters where it feels authentic and not forced. I think there is, with a lot of times with these revivals, there's a lot of fan service. And while fan service is always going to exist in shows, I think that the revivals and reboots try too much of it. And that's why it just does not. People end up not watching the reboots and revivals when they don't have the same feel and when they start to lose the authenticity of what the show was originally. And I think it is so difficult to do that when time elapses. But I also think that there is an advantage to how much when time lapses like this is that you can really propel these characters forward in their stories. And I think that Scrubs has done that. I think that and I think an advantage that Scrubs has as well is because oftentimes JD was going forward in time with his flash forwards and his daydreams, is that he was thinking about the future and he talked a lot. JD is very rooted in what the future is. I think JD lives in the future. He doesn't really live in the present. I think that's where he gets tripped up quite a bit. He lives in the future and he wants the future to be what he thinks it's going to be. I mean, you get some flash forwards here, or even in the daydreams that he's talking about, or even in those self-reflections when he does the voiceovers. When he's talking, he's thinking about what's going to happen hours later, or days later, or what's getting ready to happen for JD later. So he's always living in the future, and I think he's so in his head about what people think about him and what is going to happen to him, and all these things can really impact his destiny. I think that is something that allows this show to be successful, is because we've seen JD in these moments back in the original series. Now that we've rebooted it in 2.0, he's living in those daydreams that he once had. So I think that's what makes this show, it gives them some legs. I think it gives them some legs to be able to do some things that not a lot of other shows have the advantage of being able to do. But the reboot enters on a very interesting note because it wants you to feel like, oh, maybe this is going to be different. It gets very dramatic, very Pitt-esque, very Grey's Anatomy ER. It starts with JD coming in through the ambulance bay with the ambulance, and they're trying to resuscitate a patient. I think there's been like a wound of some sort that's been open in his side and is bleeding out profusely. It's actually showing all the blood, which Scrubs had never done. Scrubs was never about showing guts and gore. It always kind of panned away before it really showed gory, graphic type of things. And I think that's what a lot of people did like about it, because sometimes people don't watch shows like The Pit or Grey's Anatomy because it can get very gory and gruesome. And I know, for instance, one of my best friends that's watching the show that had never watched it before went back and watched the whole series and now is rewatching the revival within the last 2 months. And he's very squeamish around that kind of stuff. And he said, I'm glad that Scrubs wasn't like that because it allows me to watch it. I don't know if I can watch the other shows because I'd have to look away most of the time that it shows what's going on with the patients. And I think Scrubs has always done well with that. But this first scene was like, whoa, this is not the same Scrubs. It was very cinematic. So, in cinematic, when they even drop I guess it would be the dimensions of the screen down to even less. So it feels even more high depth, but more cinematic because it's got the black border. And then the camera is it's got more of a blue tint, dark tint to it. So it looks very dramatic, looks very dark, but very cinematic. The lighting, the way that the camera is more at an angle of like shooting up at them rather than like out at them, like a sitcom would be, or above them from an angle. This was shot in such a dramatic way, and the yelling and the high intensity, high stakes, high level. This has never really been Scrubs' thing. They do have high intensity moments, but it's never in like a pace like this. So at first I was going, maybe they're just showing the drastic difference between what Dorian was like when we last left him. He's always been real goofy. And there are so many times where he's doing things that are not practicing medicine when he's supposed to be working as a doctor, that I think it's a majority of the time that JD's actually supposed to be working. He's really not. So it's always been something that people have talked about but loved about this show, is that it did really focus more on while it does focus on the medical side of things, and it's pretty accurate in what it really depicts, I think that it was more about the humor and the relationships between doctors, which I think people really love. Because a lot of times, yes, there's always that relationship building in Grey's Anatomy or The Pit or things like that, the ER, Good Doctor, whatever it might be, House. But there is still a really heavy element on the patients, where Scrubs does a nice job of that, but like they're not solely focused on what's going on with patients. They're more focused on what's going on with the relationships between everybody in the hospital, which I really enjoy. But that first scene, it's intense, it's dramatic. They're trying to save this guy's life, and they finally do save this guy's life. They get the vitals back, the heartbeat's still going back to normal. He comes out of what was almost a flat line, and one of the nurses goes, "Great job, Dr. Dorian." And I think in his visions, I think he thinks that it's this pretty young doctor that has said this to him, because this was oftentimes what JD would often fantasize about. And and then you get much to JD's approval. And I think it was interesting. There was an article that somebody had written, and I'm not trying to knock generations before, but Gen Z watching this show in 2001 and now watching this too, you might feel that maybe JD's a little bit of a narcissist, that all he really cares about is himself, and he's very I don't know, into himself. It's very hard to explain, but there was an article that was written about this where the person ripped Scrubs and said it was awful, the revival, and much like the original series, all this person really cared about was themselves, and this not a very self-deprecating, but very prideful and almost egotistical, narcissist, masochist like type of way. And that is such not the tone of Scrubs. So it made me wonder, did this person actually watch the show? But JD is very heady, and he's in his head quite often, as we can see because of the narrations. But I think it's such a normal way to present people. Like, there is always internal dialogue going on in people's brains for the most part. And I think that this does a lovely job, and has always done a lovely job, of really explaining what's going on inside John Dorian's head. But he is celebrating a win here, because he's like, I saved this guy's life. And this is this is what I expected life to be. And the narration over it's kind of like, life takes unexpected twists. This is what life is now. And sometimes you end up in places where you not necessarily think that you might end up. Little do you know, this is one of those fantasies, because then when they're chanting Dr. Dorian and they're starting to clap, and then you get like streamers and like confetti, and it's like, great job, Dr. Dorian. It drops down a banner. Then I was like, okay, so he's having one of his fantasies again. And then it pans out and it shows him he's a concierge doctor. And this is how life has gone for him. JD left Sacred Heart 16 years ago and became a concierge doctor, which means he goes to very rich people's houses. He is very private practice, individual, goes around to people's houses, taking care of, like, I think the first one's like stitching up a foot and like dealing with people's diets and ulcers and like things at their house that you just need prescription drugs for. Basically, it's basically like having a doctor perform first aid for rich people, and that ends up being what JD has done. And he's writing prescriptions from their house, and then he's giving it to rich people, and he's getting paid very well. And I think that's supposed to be shown through the way that he's dressed. And these houses are huge that he's in. I mean, big window, floor to ceiling windows and beautiful furniture. And these people are very well dressed. The kitchens that they stand in are very impressive. So I think it's trying to show that JD has lived a very luscious lifestyle since leaving Sacred Heart, which was not the case. Sacred Heart is, I believe, a public hospital. So it was very run down. It was they tried to get by with what they could. The resources were there, but they were not the most elite of hospitals. And I think that JD's transformation into this new concierge doctor, where he's wearing like a cardigan sweater and like a little suit and tie or whatever he might be, he's much more fancy looking, more private practice, like what Elliot was in the original series, where he's not seen in scrubs. And being the title of the show, and being what JD was always in that blue scrubs that he always wore. Now he's wearing jeans and a sweater and a nice polo, or like a polo jacket, or like the nice polo button down shirts is what he's wearing. It's a totally different lifestyle. And that's how that episode opens, is that life has been very different for JD. While he thinks, and he's talking about the fact that he thinks that is the life that he always saw for himself in the ED, and being that high intensity, high pressure moments of the ED, his life is not what he assumed. And I think that that's perfect, because the fantasy that he has in episode, or the finale episode, part 2 of the finale, when he's talking to, or when he's going through that flash forward on the screen in season 8, he's having these moments of like, this is what I expect life to be. And it is not that. Life is a lot different than what JD had originally seen when he was first at Sacred Heart. And now he has taken on a whole different life. And then we find out through internal monologue that he is having to go back to Sacred Heart, which is only an hour away from where he currently lives in the suburbs. He has to go back to Sacred Heart because one of his patients that he takes care of had driven to, I think, a grandson's soccer game and had passed out. And so she got taken to Sacred Heart. So he's having to go back to the hospital that raised him, the house that built Scrubs. And he goes in, and the very first person that he sees is Carla. And Carla is standing on her chair, basically saying that everybody needs to calm down, take a chill pill. We're trying to get you through. It's very crowded. There's people standing in the waiting room. It's at capacity, it looks like. She's like, you guys need to calm down. Understand that it's very patient, that we can't just, we can't see everybody right now at this moment. She is like, we're at code black and we're at capacity, so you need to chill. And she said, so unless you got your baby's head peeking out from between your legs, do not ask me how much longer. And JD from the doorway, and it's the same exact lobby. I mean, the set of this hospital looks exactly the same layout. It's just more modern. It is wild how well that they do this, and the continuity between the way it looked and the way it looks is unbelievable. Like, it's mind-blowing how similar everything looks, just more updated as it would look in 2026. But the layout and everything exactly the same, which was absolutely wild to me. But JD goes, "How much longer, Mamacita?" And she goes, "I'll mess you up," because she doesn't see who it is. And then she goes, "Oh my God, Bambi!" And she jumps down from the chair. And she goes, "What the hell?" And they're laughing and smiling, and then they hug. And she breaks away and goes, she goes, "Does Turk know you're here?" And he goes, and he has no idea. And then it pans, and it has like this like Western little jingle that it normally had, like when JD and Turk had these moments, and it felt very like the music itself and the sound, it was just like it used to sound when you watched Scrubs. I mean, it's so hard to explain unless you watch this show religiously. If you're jumping in and this is like just the first time you've rewatched maybe the first, or maybe this is the first time you're ever watching Scrubs, like I cannot tell you how much the sounds and just the visuals made it feel like home. And it made it feel like we were just right back where we left off with these characters. And that made it so very exciting. But Turk goes, "JD's here." And in Turk fashion, JD fashion, it seems like they have this bond, this unspoken bond where they can sense where each other are, or where they've been, or how they're feeling because they've been best friends for so long. They just know. And Turk runs up from, he's performing surgery, runs up from the ED, and he slides into the hall, very Turk-esque, where he's throwing his hands, he about crashes into the wall, and he goes, "JD!" And he's like, "Turk!" And then they run, and they get ready to run towards each other. And then JD turns around and he gets himself ready for the eagle thing that they do. And he spins around and he goes, "I'm ready for you." And he goes, "All right." And Turk runs towards him, and he's like, "All right, let's do it, eagle!" And he jumps on JD's back, or sorry, JD jumps on Turk's back, and Turk is like, "All right," and then JD goes, "Eagle!" And then all of a sudden Turk goes, "Oh, oh, oh, it's my sciatica." And he goes, or "Engage your core, sea bear." And he goes collapsing, and they fall down. And he's like, "Oh, maybe we should retire Eagle." Carla's like, "Yeah, I think you should retire it." And JD's like, "Fine." Turk's like, "Fine." And Turk goes, "All right, JD, pronounce it." And he goes, he goes to pronounce it dead at a time. He looks at his watch and he goes, "I can't see the time because I don't have my glasses." So showing how old they've gotten, nothing has changed. So it seems between the two of them, they pick up right where they left off. And we get I guess the intro. It cuts to the intro, and they released this a couple days before I think it was 2 days before the episode actually dropped, maybe a day before the episode actually dropped, and it was the exact same intro with the exact same movements, but it was different cast, obviously. So the interns fill in where Cox normally is and Kelso, and but it's still JD, Carla, and them, and they're going to put the X-ray. So they get the X-rays printed, and they're showing the patient, and they go, it's the exact same intro with the exact same movements, except at the end, it was really cool how they did this. So in the original intro, they had JD put the X-ray back up onto the backlit X-ray thing that's on the wall. This time, when he turns to put the X-ray, like he's got an iPad instead of the actual printed out version of the X-rays. He's got the iPad, and the iPad, he holds it, and it shows the same X-ray that it always had on the, was like the chest cavity, and it says Scrubs on it. And he goes to put the X-ray up, but instead, because he doesn't put it up anymore because it's on an iPad, there's a TV screen, and he swipes it up to airdrop it onto the screen, which was really cool, just to show how much of that time has elapsed. It's so much different in the way that they do things now, where they can pull X-rays up on iPads and then display them on screens instead of having just like the mounted backlit like board that they used to put it on with the printed version of X-rays. So I thought that was really cool. Nice touch of the episode. But it started off so strong, and JD's like, "Man, like we should go grab dinner. It's been a while." And then like, "Yeah, I've been busy with the kids." It shows Turk and Carla have 4 kids. So Izzy's the only kid I believe that they have in the original. Now they've got 4 kids. She's the oldest. Izzy's the oldest. They got a younger kid, a younger daughter. And the younger daughter goes, "How come you don't have a nickname for me?" Because it's in Turk's house. And, and Turk goes, "You're called the Accident." It was a really funny joke. But they're like, "Yeah, we're both busy with kids. Like we and JD's like, "I live an hour away, and with my the way I have to work. I'm constantly on call, basically working with these patients as a concierge doctor. And one of my favorite, I always say that. One of my favorite lines in this episode was like JD goes, "We haven't had dinner in a long time." And he goes, "Yeah, I know. Turk's like, it's been a very long time since we had dinner." And he goes, Turk's like, "Yeah, the last time I think we had dinner was the last time that Disney, or he goes, the last time we had dinner, Disney still only had white princesses," which was gold. And I think true. I think I'm trying to remember who the first non-white princess would have been for Disney. And I want to say it's Tiana, which would have been right around when Scrubs ended. I think Tiana was shortly after, I think 2014, 2013, something like that. So he wasn't wrong. Like the last time we had seen them, Disney didn't have non-white princesses. So this was a really funny joke. And it's really funny because it's on ABC, which is owned by Disney. But it was a great joke. And I thought really kicked the show off really well. It felt the same. Carla laughing at Turk and JD, and JD and Turk's relationship being a bromance and guy love. If you remember the song that they used to sing together, and just Chocolate Bear, he calls him Sea Bear, and it just had all the feels. It felt so good. It hit on all the nostalgia in this first episode right off the bat. Turk is now the chief of surgery. He's got 4 daughters. Carla is still got that no nonsense, bringing the heart to grounding the chaos. You got Elliot, who is still at the hospital as well. And when we get that in the next scene, when JD's walking the hallways, he's saying the smells, the cleaning products, the lights, the feel, the sound, the smell, like everything felt exactly the same. And he's like, I'm so glad to be back at Sacred Heart. He passes that supply closet that he and Elliot end up in when they're, I think, right in the first couple of episodes of the whole series, way back in 2001. There is a scene where I think the patient is coding, and they're both running like, "Oh, we got to go save this guy's life," and this is such a big moment, and you don't shy away from these types of moments. And then it goes into the next scene, and it's JD and Elliot hiding in a supply closet because they're scared that they're going to screw something up, so they both hide from the code, which is funny. And it's a nod back to that original series, because he passes by that closet and he says, "That's where Elliot and I first met. We've made out in that closet. I think they've had sex in that closet. Like, they've done a lot in that closet." And he goes and passes it, and right when he goes to look from it to the hallway again, he runs into somebody that's Elliot, and she's like, "JD, what the hell are you doing here? Like, why are you here?" And JD's like, "Oh, one of my patients." He's explaining why he's there, and she goes, "The couple counselor told us that we needed our time apart after our divorce." So right away, we've established that JD and Elliot did get married, and now they are going through a divorce. And we're pretty fresh off the divorce. If the couple counselor, I think it's been about a year or so, I think, from what I've gathered. It's pretty damn fresh, and so there is still a lot of an emotion in behind the relationship ending, and they both end up in the closet talking to one another, and they're just she's like, a couple counselor told us to stay away from each other in space. And then JD gives her, he goes, "I hate couple counseling," and then he gives like a couple counseling type of line to Elliot about basically, we need our space, but we need to be able to work through this like mature adults, basically. Like, he basically backhand slaps her with some kind of advice that he had heard from the couple counselor, and he goes, "I love couple counseling," which was a great moment. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it did a nice job of reintroducing us back to Elliot. But this was something that people had a really tough time with, because the way that the show ended really foreshadowed that Elliot and JD end up happy together. They have a family together, and that's how life is going to end. And this is the hard part about bringing back a show, is that when they go back to reboot it, they're not necessarily erasing the end here, because the end of it was just JD walking out because he's gotten a new job, and leaving Sacred Heart. It is not erasing anything, which I think this is something that this show has the ability to do, because there are a lot of shows that do a flash forward and it's real. It's not a vision, it's not a foreshadow. It's real because they were ending the show and then they're like, oh shoot, let's reboot it. But now that ending doesn't count. Um, there's been multiple shows that have done this. The advantage that Scrubs have, and I don't know if they thought about this. I think they thought maybe they would like have some spinoffs, and that's what they did. I don't think reboots were really a thing back then, obviously, but it did allow. It was actually one of the most perfect endings to allow for a reboot or a revival of a TV series, the way that Scrubs originally ended in season 8. So this was perfect. And I think it makes sense because I've gone back now and I've rewatched this show recently leading up to this revival. And I actually think it makes sense that these two have ended up in divorce. Because if you go back, and I think that relationships and love were even different the way that we viewed them as audiences back then as they are today. They were not good for each other. Like this was not a very good relationship that they had. It was very toxic. It was the way that they talk to one another, the way that they, I think, cheat on one another at points. Um, the fact that like JD always seemed to be thinking about the next person and oftentimes got bored. They even got to a point where like Elliot's in love with JD and JD feels nothing for Elliot. And just the fights they would get into and uh having other feelings for other people when they're dating one another. And then Elliot's always been very insecure about who she is and her identity. JD also the same way. And I think as well it allows for there to be multiple seasons because if these two are married, what kind of conflict could there be? I mean, they're really setting this up to be a good portion of the conflict in season one. I think season one's going to be a lot about this, but I think there's a lot of running gags that can happen in other seasons as they progress throughout more seasons of the show. I think that it sets up a lot of things that can be said. And also, it allows JD to start dating. It allows Elliot to start dating again, which Elliot dating is one of the best things that happened in that first series when she dated people in that show. It was almost like watching a train wreck at time. Like, it was like, her dating life was brutal. I mean, I'm in the seasons now. I'm up to season 7 in my rewatch of the original and she's with Keith and her relationship with Keith and JD's brother and like there's multiple characters that she's fallen for that it's just been an absolute train wreck. And it's fun to watch because Elliot's very self-deprecating, very aware that she is not necessarily the most stable of people and her relationship with her parents has always been really tough. And when we first start out the series way back, her mother was even questioning if she liked guys because she couldn't keep a steady relationship. And she actually tackles, I mean, there's even times where she says she's attracted to females, and so she's dealt with that, and she gets called a lesbian by her mother, and she had a chaotic buildup. And then you go to JD's side of things. JD is somebody that nitpicked every relationship that he was in. I mean, every relationship he ever got in, it was a train wreck because he would always find something wrong with people. And I think that allowing those two to be able to date again is what's really going to add some substance to some of the season here as well. It'll be interesting to see how they handle Turk and Carla's relationship because I do think that uh, Judy Reyes has decided that she's not going to be a series regular. She's going to be more of making appearances here and there. So I don't think she's going to be in every episode, but I do think that they'll go back and forth with Carla and Turk some. But I really do. I wonder how much Carla will actually be in this initial reboot because it sounds like she's not, and we get later confirmation also that John C. McGinley is also not going to be a series regular for the most part. So, where else? What can we go from here? Then we get after the closet scene when they're talking. We get introduced to Dr. Park, and the Dr. Park had admitted the patient, Mrs. Brooks, who JD had been seeing as the concierge doctor who collapsed. Dr. Park is the one that admitted her into the hospital, brought her upstairs from the ED into The I think probably this is probably not ICU, maybe more PCU, but they brought her upstairs for more observation and being able to watch what's currently going on with her situation. And he's like, who did all these things? Like they're prescribing you things, and who did this? And she goes, well, and then Dr. Park walks in. And he goes, I did it, and he basically like JD says something about the fact that like doctors always when they're fighting in front of patients always try to do it in a nice way. And he goes, what basically in a nice way he said, what idiot would prescribe drugs and tell her to stay overnight with the vitals like this? She's fine, she probably just needs water, she looks dehydrated from the things that I've seen. And Park's like, no, I disagree with you. And he goes, what idiot would have said that? Like what idiot would have said that she would be fine? So there's like a conflict there immediately. And Dr. Park is very egotistical, you can tell. Very similar to the way that like it reminded me of the way that Bob Kelso used to talk to people, like very condescending. And you can tell that he is presented as an antagonist to JD. And we get confirmation of that because they leave the mid, like they cut a scene because basically it's Park saying nicely that JD's an idiot too. It goes out to the hallway and he goes, "You're an idiot." So like the patient doesn't hear it. It was a pretty cool contrast of like how he talks in front of the patient, and then boom, we get mid sentence a cutaway to them out in the hallway, and he goes, "You're basically an idiot, JD." And then the elevator dings and out steps Dr. Cox. We get the return, and JD's internal monologue says, there he is. There's my hero. There's my mentor. I am so excited that Dr. Cox has arrived. And he goes, now I just hope he doesn't call me newbie. He can't call me newbie. What he's going to call me, I'm not new anymore. And he goes, what's up, oldie? Which was gold. And this was in the trailer leading up to the show, so you knew it was coming. But it was such a good moment. You see Dr. Cox, and John C. McGinley looks great. I mean, I thought he looked excellent. Looks very similar. Looks just like he's gotten gray, but I thought that he looked in fantastic shape. There was a moment where he kind of looks like he's got some back pain, maybe because the way he was like kind of it was very interesting. But it's great to see John C. McGinley on the screen again in Dr. Cox's shoes because of how much he really carried. I mean, he and Braff really carry the series, and it was good. That relationship is ultimately what I think was so great about that show. I think it was the number one thing that people really enjoyed was the relationship there. And so he's back. Dr. Cox has taken over as chief medicine officer. So he's a CMO. Turk is the chief surgical officer, which I guess you call it CSO, but or chief of surgery. Sorry, which is funny because like you hear CMO, but you never hear they just call him chief of surgery. I don't know if they call him CS or COS, whatever. But JD realizes that Dr. Cox has a relationship somewhat with Dr. Park because Park says, is this the person? So clearly Dr. Cox has talked about JD a lot to Dr. Park, and Dr. Cox starts to speak, or this is said in Korean, and then Dr. Cox answers, yes, this is the idiot, basically. Like, this is JD. But he says it in Korean, and JD's like, what? And he goes, I thought I heard my name in there. And he goes, yeah, Dr. Park is teaching me Korean. So Dr. Cox still somewhat keeping JD at arm's length, but we really get their relationship later on in the episode of where it currently stands. And it was pretty darn cool. The moment that they have later on, or moments that they have later on. But yeah, Dr. Park, I think, is going to present as the antagonist. And even through episode 2, we really do feel his disdain for JD because Dr. Cox is the chief medical officer, the boss of Dr. Park, and all this guy seems to talk about is a doctor that hasn't worked there for 16 years. So I think Dr. Park would have a little bit of an issue of like, what is this guy that you've talked about multiple times? Like, well, who is he to you? You talk like he's his prodigal son. Like, I don't know what he is to you, but it's really annoying. And I thought it was a really cool setup there. We then get a scene too with the nurse's station. We're back talking with Elliot and them. And I'm kind of going to break away from scene by scene here, but throughout the episode, we get this understanding that Dr. Turk is called Dr. Bummer by the interns. And we've got a new set of interns that we will get later introduced to because Dr. Cox is like, look what I have to deal with. But um, Turk has turned into kind of a bummer. Not kind of, a bummer. Dude's been like going through it. And that's where we pick up with Turk. He has clearly experienced way too much. And we've not had any talk yet about COVID. I'm sure that's going to come up. I'm sure COVID will come up at some point because we are now in 2026, 6 years later, and all these doctors are still working in hospitals and as concierge doctors. And I think that the more that we unravel Turk's burnout, the more that we will get into what they experienced in 2020 and the fallout of that, and then also the fallout of them being away from the hospital and JD not practicing in a hospital for 16 years, basically. It's all going to come to a head, and I think that we really get that set up in season one, episode one. Here is that we get an admission from, um, or sorry, an admittance from Dr. Turk that things are not going well, and uh, yeah, the whole relationship between JD and Turk is interesting because as the episode goes on, we get more confirmation that they've not necessarily been as close as they were. And it's because of their lives taking different twists and turns. And um, Turk has gotten this reputation in the hospital that he's just a bummer to be around, that he's kind of the ass that you don't really want to be around. And his surgical interns, Dr. Trainer and Dr. Hadi, call him Dr. Bummer. And everybody seems to think that same thing. And uh, so yeah, it's not good. Turk's relationship with the rest of the crew is not great, and we then get a scene where we get introduced to our interns. I think Dr. Cox calls one of the interns Dr. TikTok at one point because she gets all of her medical mentorship from a guy, Dr. Randy, on TikTok. And Cox is obviously like, I'm the teacher. Like, you're supposed to listen to me. But here you are listening to some random dude doctor on TikTok giving you advice on how to do things when I'm supposed to be your teacher, not him. And uh, Cox is introduced, JD to, I think he calls them misfits. Basically, like, look at this cast of characters that I have, and it's just showing that they're young interns that seem way over their head, just like when JD was an intern. And Dr. Cox admits to the fact that he misses when they were interns because the competence level there seems to be very low with these new interns. And Dr. Cox is like, it's been brutal. But he starts to interact with the interns with Dr. TikTok, I think it is. And he's basically berating her. And then we get introduced to a new character that I think is going to be very similar to what we had with Ted and Janitor a little bit in the original series. And that is Sibby Wilson. And Sibby Wilson is her title on her tag, on her nameplate on her desk. We get later on, we get confirmation she's a wellness director, which typically are people that work with HR. They're not HR, but I think in this case, she's acting as if she is the HR person. So I don't know if that's like a spin on or a different name for what they're calling an HR director, but basically that's who Sibby Wilson feels like. She feels like the person that is, she's in administration, but the fact that they call her a wellness director, that's interesting to me because typically wellness directors are more leaning towards of like internal, like how team members can get help should they need it, not necessarily like somebody that's going to knock you down for policy. But that seems to be the role she is taking, is she's going to be kind of the rule follower. And we get another great fantasy from JD in this moment because as Dr. Cox interacts with her, she's like, no, Dr. Cox, you need to take it down a notch. Like she gives the little hand things like, you're here, you need to be here. And clearly somebody that's going to be a pin and a thorn in Dr. Cox, because Dr. Cox is very harsh. The way that he teaches is very old school, very direct. He's very, he'll be very challenging towards people. He tries to challenge you to be better by giving you a kind of the hard truth and that tough love. And uh Cox walks away and he goes, he calls her the feelings police. And then JD has a fantasy of like, it's like this couple out in the driveway, and he's like, this the wife is like, I'm feeling all these things, I'm upset, and the guy's basically being an ass, and he's like, you don't feel these things, he's gaslighting her, and he's like, oh, feelings police here. And then she starts to cry and get upset, and like this husband's being a complete jerk, and the wife is standing in this fantasy, and she's like starts to hit on JD and starts to get all hot and heavy with JD, and then they start to make out in front of the husband. And it's a good one. It's a good fantasy of like the feelings police, and he's wearing like this wool jacket. Looks like a dog. He looks like he shed the dog, like a Labrador retriever, and he like put all the fur on it. Like it was a funny fantasy. But then we get more discussion between Elliot and Turk and Carla. I think we're going to get a lot of this where we're going to get conversations where Turk and Elliot and Carla are discussing things because they've been working together for 15 years, 16 years since JD left, plus the years that they worked. So they've been over together for like 25 years plus. JD's left and has not been as close, right? So there would be a very interesting dynamic. Like JD would almost feel as if he's in the outside looking in, where Carla, Turk, and JD, or sorry, Carla, Turk, and Elliot have been best friends for that 25 years, where JD's kind of lost touch with them. And uh, they start to talk about, Elliot's like, how am I supposed to focus with JD here? And that's the whole premise of Elliot's first episode is like, how am I supposed to do this with you here? It's not healthy for us to be together right now. And so that'll be a dynamic to watch. In this episode as well, we get JD mentoring the intern. So Dr. Cox actually allows for JD to teach the interns because Dr. Cox says he's tired of the dealing with them. So JD goes through and he's having some great moments with the new interns, and he's teaching them as he's talking to the patient that he's taking care of. Dr. Green, which is the English guy, is great. He can't stick the patient with the shot that she needs, and he's like, that's not how you do it. That's not good. Like it basically, Dr. Asher Green is JD. When JD first started, he's like very self-doubt, very shaken in his confidence, not able to do things. He's scared to do things. He's scared to go up against authority. He's always seeking approval. Dr. Green is just like JD was back in season 1 of Scrubs. And we get introduced to Dr. Blake Lewis, and he is a very confident, very cocky, very handsome looking guy. He's a big guy. Somebody that would the gravity he holds. I mean, people really look up to him. And so Blake Lewis, he puts the shot in, and Dr. Lewis, he goes, you did that so well. And he's like just admiring the guy. And he's got this funny moment where he goes, oh, you did that real pretty. I mean, you did that really well. You did that well. You made it look easy is what he said. But he calls it pretty. He goes, you did that so pretty. I mean, easy, very easy. You did that easy. Which was really funny because JD's always been struck by handsome men, which was always good because it's like an inferior complex, but it's also, I think, JD can admire a good looking guy, and this guy is very good looking, Dr. Blake Lewis. So that was really good. And yeah, we get introduced to all the interns at this point. We know all of them. Dr. Tosh is Dr. TikTok, and Dr. Hottie and Dr. Trainer are surgical interns. So we're going to get a lot of interactions with them as we get further and further into the episode. And we get a lot of them in episode 2 as well. But yeah, Dr. Turk, again, just real grumpy, real crotchety, doesn't really, give a time of day to Dr. Trainer or Dr. Hottie. And they're just like, this guy is just bumming us out. So they go and they start to complain at the nurse's station. JD hears it. JD's like, who's Dr. Bummer? Who you calling Dr. Bummer? And they're like, Turk. He's such a bummer. And JD tries to give advice and go, you know how you can cheer Turk up is go up to him and go, "What up?" as he would normally do in the series prior. And so the docs are like, okay, like we'll try that, but like I don't think that's gonna work. The dude's such an ass. And then JD asked Carla, like, that's what they call Turk? And she's like, yeah, he's always grumpy, he's always down, he's always that. And then we get a Hooch appearance. Dr. Hooch comes in and he is there's a moment where he and Carla are talking, or JD and Carla are talking, and Dr. Hooch walks over and he's like, I forget what the Hoochism is at this point, but I was trying to find it real quick. In let me see if I can search it here. Oh yeah, he goes, he's like, yeah, Dr. Turk, um, he's been called Dr. Bummer, and Carla's like, Carla, do you know that the intern's calling Dr. Bummer? And Carla says, well, I mean, I'm sure you know how dark Turk's been at work lately. JD goes, just nod like you do internally. And he goes, and he refuses to talk about it. Y'all talking about Dr. Turk? And you look up and it's it's Hooch. And Hooch goes, if so, prayers up. And he walks away. And JD goes, even Hooch knows? Tap there, like internally. And he goes, is Hooch still crazy? And Carla goes, he's gotten worse. So Hooch is still crazy. One of my favorite gags running on. But I thought it was a really good moment. And then we get JD and Turk talking about the fact that they're going to go confront Dr. Cox because JD's been right about his patient all along, that his patient should be able to leave the hospital. Dr. Park and Dr. Cox are just keeping her for whatever reason they're keeping her. And he goes to confront Dr. Cox and he says that he goes, basically, you're wrong, Perry, I'm right. And he goes, you need to admit that you're wrong. And Park should admit that they're wrong. And Park goes, I'd rather self-circumcised than say that I'm wrong, which was funny. And then JD goes, wow, that was dark. There's also a moment too. I think it's this episode. It might be next. I can't remember. No, it's this episode where he comes in and he's talking, and JD says something about like, "Oh, I need to. You look like something that's wrong." Or he goes, "This is my angry rock, and you're wrong." And he goes, you should feel this way. And he goes, and basically, Dr. Park goes, "You look like a menopausal lesbian," because JD confronts Cox about keeping the patient, and Parks hears it from another bed, and he's like, yeah, JD, you look like a menopausal lesbian, which I thought was really funny. And JD's like, whoa, man, that's way too far. So that was a good line too. I really thought that the jokes really landed well in this one. So again, I think that they do a really nice job of blending humor with it being appropriate humor in 2026. And so I think that that's something that they'll continue doing going forward. But then the most interesting part of the Turk and JD relationship at this point, we get towards the end of the episode, and Turk and JD are going to go out for drinks, like I said, or go out to eat and grab some dinner. And we get this really, really rough moment between Turk and JD, because JD is now trying to uh, find out why Turk is so dark now, and trying to figure out why he's so uh, upset. And he goes, what's wrong with you, man? Like, what's been going on? Like, why are you Dr. Bummer? And Turk goes, you have no idea what it's like. You don't work in the hospital anymore, so you can't connect with me on this. He goes, what was cool about when you worked here is that after rough days, um we used to be able to go on the roof, drink some beers and have a laugh and just forget the day, talk to each other. He goes, but you're not around anymore, you're an hour away, you don't work here anymore, I don't have anybody to go to. And he goes, I'm burnt out. And he's like, Donald Faison in this one is such a rough, because he's crying, like he's having this emotional breakdown. He's got his eyes are welling up. He's like, I'm burnt out, man. Like, I got nowhere to go, and I wish you were still here. He goes, I miss you. I miss us. I miss this. And he goes, I'm just burnt out. But he goes, you wouldn't know that. You don't understand that. And JD's trying to coach him up, but he's like, no, don't talk to me like you know what's going on here. You don't. You don't understand what we're going through. So it's such a tough moment, because it's not JD's fault that he's not there necessarily. It's just it's a result of their situation, and Turk feels like he's got nobody to go to, and he's goes, this is at a time where male loneliness is really taken a toll on, I mean, mental health, and talking about men being lonely because they don't open up necessarily to their guy friends, and they're afraid to talk about emotions. And Turk had always been kind of that way, even on the original episode or the original series, is that Turk was built as this character that never really tried to talk about his emotions, and JD was an emotional person. And so he tries to get Turk to open up, and Turk's like, you know what, I can't do dinner, man. Like I'm just too distraught, I'm too burnt, I just can't. I don't want to do it because he doesn't want to talk about it. And JD realizes there's a real problem there, and he's like, I can't believe that my best friend is feeling this way, and there's nothing that I can really do. Um, but man, it was such a rough one to watch. So JD's really trying to get people to understand, or JD's trying to understand what's going on in everybody's life as he's been gone for this long, and he's just trying to get back in with people. And um, that's when he's like, Turk is opening up to other people, but he won't open up to me. And I think JD feels like they have lost touch. They've lost the ability to be there for each other. So that'll be something I think that they'll focus on going forward as well. Um, Elliot, same thing. Elliot's like, she feels that she's losing people now that JD's back. She blames Dr. Cox for bringing JD back. You know, Carla has talked to JD, and Carla Carla has told people that it's been Elliot's fault that the divorce happened. Like Elliot was the one that initiated the divorce, and you get that sense because she's talking at lunch with her, and Elliot's like, I don't know who told him that. And she's like, well, maybe I told him that you were the one that initiated the divorce. Not in a bad way, but just the fact that like that's what happened. And Dr. Cox is it's a good moment because Dr. Cox is like, well, that's Carla and I were best friends way before, not best friends, but good friends way before you guys. We used to confide in each other way before you interns showed up. And Elliot's like, this isn't fair that JD's here, and I'm having to deal with this. And it really, I mean, it's tough on Elliot. Like Elliot is really feeling like she is being not replaced, but now that JD's back in the picture, clearly Turk and Carla, even though they've been uh, out of touch with JD for a while, that's still Turk's best friend. And Carla and Turk lived with JD, and I think are closer with JD. And I know Carla has a really good relationship with Elliot, but also they've had their moments where they've not been necessarily best of friends. So I think Elliot feels that JD steps back in, and now she'll be replaced in the group friend or the friend group, and that's not a relationship that she can have with them because of the divorce. And so she feels like she's losing her friends, and so that's why she feels that it's not fair. But uh we really don't get much else. I'm trying to think of anything else that we get in episode 1 where we see maybe some of the characters, but I can't really think. We do get an instance, and I think it might be. I see. This is the problem with watching 2 episodes is I start to blend them together, and I can't remember which one. I've got notes, so I'm trying to figure out where it blends. But um, the Dr. Cox relationship um, with the interns is something that I think is only in episode 1 because I don't know. I don't think. Yeah, see, this is where I tripped up because I'm trying to figure out which episodes are which. But at the end of the episode, we do get a moment where um, JD confronts Dr. Cox about why are you keeping this healthy patient here? I need to discharge my patient. Why are you and Dr. Park keeping this patient here? And he goes, well, it's not Dr. Park that's keeping the patient there, Miss Brooks. It's me. I'm keeping your patient here longer than she should be here because I want you here. I need you here. And JD's like, what? And Cox admits to missing JD, but also he's like, you're so good at teaching these interns and relating to these interns. Because there is a moment where Dr. Trainer tries to talk to JD about why Turk's so grumpy. And there is a moment where Cox observes these um, doctors and interns confiding in him. One thing that I missed that's huge in this episode is Dr. Blake Lewis is in a lobby talking to the other interns in the middle of the episode where he's talking to um, the other interns, and a patient approaches them in the waiting room, and the patient says, "Hey, can you take a look at my wife? She's been sick to her stomach and she's throwing up and she won't stop throwing up and she's sick and she's in the car. Can you come take a look real quick?" And he's like, "Well, no, man, like that's not what we do here. You just need to take her to the ER." And he goes, "I can't afford to do that. That'll be so expensive. And once I admit her into the ER, I'll have to pay all this money." And the guy goes, "Can you just come out and look in the car and see if she's okay?" And Dr. Blake Lewis, the real handsome, cocky doc intern, says, "This isn't a Wendy's, dude. You can't just you can't order care from your car." And he goes, "No, like take her to the ED and she'll be fine." And he goes, "Okay, thanks." And he walks away. And this guy's clearly distraught. So he goes back to his car. And this is like probably late evening, like 3 or 4 o'clock when this happens. And then um, at the end, or sorry, towards the end of the episode is what I'm trying to say. Dr. Blake Lewis has a moment where, because Dr. Tosh, who's having a hard time uh, doing a central line and getting a central line in. At first, she stabs the patient, and then blood goes all over Dr. Green, who's the other intern, the British guy. And then she finally gets it because JD has taught her how to do it. It's a proud moment. She starts to celebrate with the other interns, and JD's standing by the nurse's station, and JD goes, that's what's cool, is that you get to teach these interns how to do this. And it was a great moment, a teaching moment for her, but I'm happy. But one person wasn't happy for her, and he stops Dr. Lewis as they pass him in the hallway. He stops Dr. Lewis and he says that, man, like, you should be happy for her because you're going to have moments like this too, where you're going to need their support as well. And every moment of support that you can give to another fellow intern can really make or break them. There's going to be moments in this, in your profession. There's going to be moments in your internship. There's going to be moments throughout your career where you're really going to need a support cast. And if you keep isolating people, you're going to be on an island and nobody's going to care enough to help you through it. And you're going to need a support crew, because he goes, "I needed it. Everybody needs it that walks these hallways." And Dr. Lewis is basically like, "You might say that, man, but I don't need that. I don't need anybody's help. I'll get through anything." So he kind of is like, damn, like this guy's not listening to anything. And Dr. Cox is like, and then we also get a moment with Dr. Trainer that Dr. Cox observes where he goes, "Can you?" She goes, "Can you talk to Dr. Turk for us, because he's really bumming us out, and like we really confide in JD." So you've had multiple interns, Dr. Green as well. Multiple interns confide in JD, and uh, I think it's cool because they've really set up these interns very well, and I think that's something they struggled with when they tried to do season 9, is they just didn't build those interns well. Whereas these really do. I mean, these interns I actually really do care about so far, which I find very good for this show. And so I care about the successes of these interns, where I've had a hard time with that in some of the other shows that have brought in new interns and you just don't have that same emotional attachment to. But these interns I do, because of the stories they've started to build up. Like Dr. Trainer is just trying to get the approval of Turk and her boss, and she's just not getting it. She's running into obstacles because Turk's being an ass. And she's going to JD to confide because she knows that's his best friend. And so again, we get some great moments with them. There are some new charge nurses. I don't remember this is episode 1 or 2, but there's charge nurses that seem very Laverne-esque in the way they are always in trying to listen to what the doctors are saying. They're like leaning forward. Francois, and I forget the lady's name, the nurse's name, but there's 2 nurses. They're 2 charge nurses because JD's trying to make relationships. I think this is episode 2, but we're getting some really great built-in characters that are not really replacing ones like Elliot or like the janitor or Kelso and Ted and them, but like I think they're starting to try to build up that same kind of in the cast in numbers kind of thing, where there's everybody in there that we really root for. So they're doing a nice job of that. But going back to the interns, Dr. Lewis is so arrogant, so cocky, and the episode ends with two very powerful moments. Let's stick with Dr. Lewis for right now. At the end of the episode, they're walking out to leave. The interns are, and JD's outside as well after, and JD is observing. There's a lot of chaos going on, and there's I think there's a guy on a there's a person on a gurney, and there's ambulance people pushing her, or there's medics in the parking lot that are pushing a gurney by. And then we see that patient that we saw back in the waiting room earlier in the episode that had talked to Dr. Lewis about his wife being in the car and being sick and throwing up. Uh, he goes, "My wife just had a heart attack and died. Like, she's dead because of you. And you didn't take the time. You didn't take the time to really see what was wrong with her. And because of that, now you've got to deal with the fact that she's going to die." And it is such a powerful moment, um, because this is one of those moments where Scrubs has always done very well with. And um, it's such a deep moment because it would have taken him a minute to go out and to check. But because he didn't, she died. And JD has a great internal monologue in this moment. This is where I find it really cool what Scrubs can do. They can go from excellent comedy, very light moments, to some of the deepest moments in television. And that's what they do here. She was found unresponsive in the car. She had a heart attack. She's dying. She's dead. Like, they're gonna lose her. And JD says, "I've seen this so many times. You can't get through them on your own." And he goes back to the group of interns because Blake is up alone by himself after he had just interacted with the patient that said, "You killed my wife," basically. And Blake is clearly like, "It would have just taken 1 minute. And I could have helped." And JD goes, "This wasn't your fault. It could have happened to any one of us." Um, or sorry, that was Dr. Green that says that. And he goes, "This wasn't your fault. It could have happened to any of us." And then Dr. Lewis goes, "It would have taken me 1 minute to just go out there and check on her. And now she's dead because I didn't walk outside. I should have done something." And then JD says, "And like that, I knew what my decision was." It's after this moment where he is teaching, and Dr. Green's the one that goes up to Mr. Dr. Lewis, and then the rest of the interns come up and try to comfort Blake in this moment where he's having a really tough moment of like, he probably is considering maybe this isn't, I'm not cut out for this because because of my arrogance, because of an ass, some lady's dead because of that now. And so JD is like, this is the moment I got into medicine for. Like, I'm the teacher now. I'm the kind of teacher that they need. So he goes up and he talks to Dr. Cox. Dr. Cox is still there with the patient. JD goes, "Hey." And Cox says, "What are you still doing here? I thought you'd be long gone from now." And or JD goes, "I'll take the job." And Dr. Cox says, "Oh, I'm quite glad," and then laughs. And JD goes, "Perry, working alongside you will be one of the greatest honors of my life." And again, we get that God complex of like JD still groveling at the feet of Dr. Cox. And Dr. Cox says, "I should have been clearer." And JD says, or sorry, Dr. Cox continues, "You're not going to be working with me. You're going to be me. You're the new chief of medicine." And JD goes, "What?" He starts laughing. He goes, "No." And he goes, "I can't be you." And Dr. Cox goes, "You're right." He says, "Just be you." And then JD says, Cox says, "This particular world has passed me by. You're the only one I trust to do better and try harder." JD goes, "Perry, I really don't think JD, those interns need somebody to do for them what I did for you. Okay." And then in Scrubs fashion, like as I'm getting chills and choking up reading that, and then in JD or then in Scrubs fashion, Cox goes, Dr. Park really wanted this job, and his hatred for you is going to burn quite hot. And that thought will keep me warm at night. So Dr. Cox is still hating on JD a little bit. And JD has a monologue where it's like, I have never been a boss. I've never even run a lemonade stand. But one thing's for sure, I can't do this all on my own. What a damn ending. The internal monologue is quoting the intro theme song. I can't do this all on my own. What a great moment. And it is it is an ending to Dr. Cox's run as the chief medical officer. And it it just it's tough because you love Dr. Cox and you don't want this to end, but it does feel like this is more of McGinley will be around as Dr. Cox, but it will be very rare to see. I don't know how that'll all work in maybe like a season 2 or maybe further down the road if Cox comes back, but for right now, I guess we can assume that Dr. Cox, and I don't think he's in episode 2 at all. We start to see an end. Then we get the end scene, which is something that Scrubs started doing, where they got kind of like an end credit almost before the credits roll. Before end credit is what we can call it. But it's JD and Turk sitting on the roof, and JD says, I read in the New York Times that there's such thing as male loneliness epidemic, and that some guys are actually calling their friends at night to say goodnight. And he goes, or Turk goes, that's crazy, laughing. And JD says, I know. And then he goes, do you think it would be cool if Turk goes, not a shot in the dark. And JD goes, yeah, I don't want to do it either. And Turk goes, yeah. And then Turk's finally like, all right, maybe once a week. And JD goes, Wednesday it is. So it was a good moment. They'll start to keep in touch more often, obviously, because they're working together. But also JD finally feels like he's able to admit to Turk that he misses him, and Turk's able to admit that they miss each other. So that's great. That's cool. I love that. I love the end of that episode. We'll jump into episode 2 and kind of summarize what happened there. So episode 2, my second first day, and the episode, JD accepts his new role in earnest. Episode explores what it means to be back at Sacred Heart. There's a clear sense that JD is no longer the wide-eyed intern. Now he stands at the crossroads between mentor and medical leader. So throughout this whole episode, he's wrestling with what he can be as a leader. He tries the Dr. Cox thing where he's tough love. He tries the easy approach where he has nicknames for the different interns, and he's trying to see how he is as a leader. And he calls her Dr. Tosh, because at first he tries the tough love thing with Blake, and he says something like, no, Blake, that's wrong. And he goes, no, that's right. We're discharging the patient. So that is right. And he goes, sorry, I was just trying to give you tough love, because he wasn't listening to Dr. Blake and why he was discharging him as they're doing their rounds. And he'd already discharged him. Everything he did was right, Dr. Lewis. And JD's just trying to figure out how he wants to be. So he tries to be the hard ass, but he's wrong, because he goes, well, you should have done this. And he goes, well, no, I shouldn't have done that, because the patient's discharging going home because we helped them, which was a good one. He goes, fine, I guess I'll be the mentor that gives you cool nicknames as a light. And he calls Dr. Tosh Hot Mouth because she gets a lot of the answers right. And then it pans into him, the next scene of him in the office with Sibby Wilson, and Sibby's the wellness director. And she's like, you calling her Dr. Hot Mouth? That's a problem. Like, that's an HR nightmare. You get sued for that. That's weird. And JD's like, that's not what I meant. I was just trying to decide what kind of relator I was. Sibby and JD are pretty similar. They're very sensy, as they would call each other. Sensitive people. I think that's what JD calls sensitive people in the original series, is sensy people, because they have sensitive feelings, and they feel like they're in their feelings. But then we get some talk about Sibby being wild. Like, Sibby says some crazy stuff in these episodes. Like, she talks about how she takes shots and dances and like got drunk all the time. And so Sibby's wild. I think we're going to get a fun dynamic with her as we build her character more. And I really like that they introduce her, but she goes, your case, you got some things to work on, but we'll work through those. I got more pressing matters. She goes, the next meeting is going to be a big one. And she slams this huge folder down. And she goes, yeah, this next meeting is going to be a lot. And Todd comes in, and there's like some sexual innuendo. And she says something about a growing something, like a growing file, growing folder, growing endeavor, or whatever. And he goes, I'll show you what's in growing. And it's like, it cuts away, and it's like this band because Turk goes, I've got a surprise for you earlier in the episode. And it's they walk into like the lobby area, and there's this high school band, and JD's like, oh my god, you got me a band. And he goes, no, their bus jumped they jumped the median, that's why they're in here to get checked on. And he goes, no, I got you French, or I got you Chief 1 Chief 2 bracelets. So it was really good. I like the opening of this episode. They're really building out JD as a leader, and what he wants to be as a leader. Turk's very happy that he's a leader. But then you start to get into the complications of JD being that leader. And you've got Elliot, who wants a new simulation lab because she's the new head of simulation over at Sacred Heart. You got Turk, who wants a new robotic surgical tool, the new robot who can do and perform surgeries. It's a newest designs in all of the healthcare or medical field is the new surgical robots that they get. The surgical robot is expensive. The simulation lab is expensive. There's a lot of conversation throughout the episode. One of my favorite parts is when JD and Turk know they have to go through JD to get funding for these two things that they both want, because the surgical robot is very expensive and needed to bring in revenue. And then you've got Elliot, who's trying to still teach the interns and trying to use the simulation labs on how to deal with coatings and stitches and all sorts of different things that you need to help practice. And so she wants that for the interns. And JD realizes that the equipment is out of date and they need some of the new state-of-the-art stuff to help teach, because it is a teaching hospital. You have this really interesting dynamic throughout the whole episode of Turk and Elliot asking JD for money, and you can tell that they're setting up, they're not going to be able to afford both, that one will have to take priority over the other. And JD is trying to navigate the waters of a leader. He's trying to teach the interns on how to be the docs that they need to be. We get a really good storyline with Dr. Green in this episode, the British doctor. Intern. He is realizing that healthcare is very expensive in this country, not like in the UK where you get free healthcare. The US is so expensive that people can't often pay for it, that you just get bills and bills and bills. And throughout the episode, he's trying to find ways around it. And JD at first tells him to call the insurance company and try to work with the insurance company to knock down the cost of the bills for the patient. The patient ends up is going to have to flip the bill because there is no headway made between Dr. Green and the insurance companies. JD gets frustrated because he's frustrated with Turk and Elliot asking for things, and he gets pretty pissed off because he's like, sometimes being a leader, and he has an internal monologue that's like this. He says that, sometimes being a leader, the toughest thing is you have to be able to tell people no, that it's not going to work, that you have to basically shut people down in order to be a good leader. And very Kelso-esque in the way that he says that there's nothing you can do to help Dr. Green. Like, you need to work with your other patients because you're spending way too much time on this patient trying to get them help. And he's like, well, you're going against what you just told me to do. You advised me to try to help this guy as much as possible. Now you're telling me to get to work with other patients because we don't have time. You're losing the money for the hospital. So Dr. Green is very conflicted. He's like, this is not what I got in healthcare for. If every time that I have to go in there and see these people not be able to afford healthcare, I can't do this. So Dr. Green's basically giving up on being a doctor in this episode. He is so beaten down by the fact that he realizes that the majority of people he helps are not going to be able to get the care that they need or afford the care that they need. And that really destroys Dr. Green. And it's a great social commentary on the real healthcare that we experience here in the United States is so expensive that most people cannot afford just your general healthcare, which is unbelievable and awful. But it's just the way things are. And so that is a truth that Dr. Green is learning. And I think is going to continue to be something that challenges this whole cast, is that the growing concerns of what's going on in the healthcare profession. And everything else like that's going to be wrapped up into this. And so that was a really good one. And that concludes. There is a point at the end of the episode where JD has made a couple calls to collect as many trial samples of drugs to try to help the guy out for as much as he can. He gets, I think, like 2 or 3 months worth of drugs for the guy to at least get him on his feet and healthy. But he says after that, he's going to have to decide on what healthcare looks like after that, and he's going to have to try to pay for some of this. But we'll try to help him out for a couple months here, basically for free. But beyond that, we can't really help. And Dr. Green's very appreciative of this, and it's JD's way of being like, "Hey, I'm sorry for the way that I talked to you, but I got wrapped up into what was going on, and I don't like the way things go with the healthcare system." And JD was always that person that was like that when he was an intern. I think he really tries to connect with Dr. Green on this issue, and that's the best way that he can do it. But Dr. Tosh, we get more of her in episode 1 and 2. She is the TikTok doctor. She is an influencer as well. She gets brand deals. She's been there. I think she's an attending or a resident, whereas the others are more, I'd say she's probably more resident. And so she's been there at Sacred Heart. And one of the doctors, Dr. Hadi, is really a big fan of her. She's Hadi has watched her. I think that's how you say her last name, Hadi. It sounds like I'm saying Hati, but it's Hadi. And she is a doctor that has watched Dr. Tosh's videos on being a doctor, and that's why she came to Sacred Heart. And she loves that doctor, and Dr. Tosh is an influencer, and she gets all these brand deals and sponsorships and money from that. And they in this episode, you get Dr. Hadi and Dr. Trainer being like, "We don't like her. She's annoying. Why do you spend time with her?" And Dr. Tosh is just like very nice, and I think she really is. She's trying her best to be a doctor that she needs to be, and she has to do this to pay for her. She goes, basically, I don't have any debt because I paid with all my medical bills or all my med school loan. I paid with the money I made off of TikTok and social media. So don't knock it till you try it. But the other girls are it's very mean girl type of thing where it's we don't like you because you're successful. And so that's the impression that you get. And there's some really good moments, some jump scares. It was really funny because she's like around every corner, and as they're trying to talk trash about her, she hears everything, which is really funny. But yeah, Dr. Trainer and Dr. Hadi are not fans of or sorry, Dr. Hadi's a big fan. Dr. Trainer is not a fan of the influencers in the medical field, but they eventually get on the same page when Dr. Tosh is just like, I just do this because I care. And, and Dr. Trainer's like, oh, I'm not good with apologies. And she's around the corner and hears it. And she's like, I'm sorry for being mean like this. It's just that, it's something I don't understand. I'm being judgmental, but I shouldn't be because you're just doing what you do and you care and you genuinely are a nice person. I feel sorry that I really judged you before I got to know you, kind of thing. But yeah, this whole episode is about JD navigating the new challenges. He ends up having to decide between the simulation lab and the robot, and he decides to go with the robot because the robot is a big expense, just like the simulation lab is a big expense, but at least the surgical robot's going to bring in more cases and allow for more cases. So it's going to bring in revenue. Whereas the simulation lab is only going to cost, and JD has to decide. And that's what's awful about healthcare is like the simulation is great for creating better doctors who, in the long run, that actually might be better for revenue is you retain doctors more. You train your doctors to be the best. But it's going to cost you a lot up front where you don't necessarily see their reward until later on. Whereas the surgical robot, it's going to cost you up front, but it's also going to give you that revenue quickly back to pay for what you have just spent. So that's what they decide to go with. And this is that classic, relationship building moment where Elliot's like, Turk, when JD was gone, we were best friends, but now it seems like we're competing with one another again. And I don't want it to be that way. You're my best friend, one of my best friends. Just because you and JD knew each other before, we've been best friends for 20 some years now too. So why are you acting this way? Like, you act like JD can just come in and take over, and now you only care about JD and not me anymore, and we're not friends anymore because you JD's here. And Turk's like, I don't want you to feel that way, Elliot. Like, I love you as well as a best friend, and I want you to be successful, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. And he goes, I'm sorry you felt that way, that you felt that when JD re-enters, that I'll just forget about you and our friendship. He goes, I still care deeply for you too as a friend. And I don't want you to think that because JD's here that you're going to get replaced. And she goes, well, it feels like you are. And so that's a really good moment that they have where they feel that because JD's back in the picture, it changes everything. And it does somewhat, but not to the point where like it should change it to where you no longer are friends. But yeah, JD's seriously, he's figuring out that, this is going to be a really tough change from what he's used to, where he's only ever trying to help people. Now he's going to make decisions that are going to have drastic effects on everybody. And I think those are tough waters to navigate for JD. And he goes, there's a point at the end of the episode. So they're building up to that evening. They're having a dinner to welcome um, JD as the new chief medical officer. But there's this ongoing storyline that he's got so much to deal with, it's too busy. And it shows at the end of the episode that he doesn't even attend his own dinner to welcome him as the chief medical officer. And Dr. Park eats his cake, and that's supposed to be, I think, like a metaphor for the fact that, like, you know JD was supposed to be there to enjoy his own cake, but he can't because he's so busy with all the new challenges that he has. And Dr. Park is willing to take anything from JD at the moment's notice. Whenever he gets the chance to bite, he's going to. And I think that's what that's setting up, is that Dr. Park is waiting there for JD to fail, for JD to make that one mistake. And that's when he's going to circle it and attack. So that's what that's building up to. Dr. Park is the one that texts Elliot and JD, or sorry, Elliot and Turk, that JD's going to have to decide between the two, whether he gets the surgical robot or the simulation lab. Like, Park's the one that says, like, oh, JD's gonna have to make this decision between one or the other. And JD's like, how do they know that? And he goes, I texted him. And he's sitting in the couch behind in the chief medical office. He's eating popcorn, watching Elliot and Turk say, no, I need the simulation lab. No, I need the surgical robot. And they're having this argument. And Turk's like, here's, take your stupid bracelet back. I don't need it. And then talks about the divorce. And he's like, just because you have a hatred for me doesn't mean that you should have other people suffer because of it. Elliot's like, you're allowing them to suffer because of our divorce and our relationship. And JD's like, that's not what this is about. And so, what some really good moments. I mean, there is there are some moments here too where JD supposedly, like, there's a rumor, and I think Elliot might have started this, but there's a rumor that he had cheated on or on JD. JD had cheated on Elliot with Valentina. Sorry, I'm recording so long, I'm starting to get winded. But um, Turk, I mean, sorry, JD and Valentina supposedly had this affair, but Valentina is not even a real person. And we get confirmation of that at the end of the episode when JD's sitting in the chief medical officer office, in his own office, and he's talking to Turk, and Turk's like, I don't want to be here, but I'm here to help support you and all the things that you're going through and the challenges that you're going through. And so this whole episode, I mean, really is built up to be building out our interns and having those moments. I think as we get further and further, like, this was hard to do because there was 2 episodes, there was a lot to unpack. But I think as we go forward, what we'll do is we'll focus more on character storylines rather than scene by scene, just because it's easier to do that. But ultimately, I thought these were both excellent. Especially the first episode was such a great episode, and I thought both deserve like a 9.5 on the rating for Logan. For me, I think that it was such a great start to a show and a revival of a show that I love, and I can't wait to see where they build that out. Going forward, I'm interested to see where they can sprinkle in the janitor and Carla and Dr. Cox and stuff, because I do think that they are going to have limited screen time. I think we're going to build up a lot of these other characters. So I think that we will get a return from some of the older characters. But again, where does the janitor really fit in this? Where does, you know, Miller's character, where does Jordan really fit into this? Where does Cox fit into this? Is Kelso going to come back at some point? Is Ted going to come back at some point? We had mention of Mickhead in this. We did get Hooch back. Um, so I'll be interested to see who all does come back for a little bit of a revival here, as we have a lot of people that they had star in this show. I would be interested to see if they can get them to come back. So we shall see. Love this episode. Love these episodes. Sorry. I think that it'll be a lot of fun covering it going forward. And I'm so happy Scrubs is back. They are doing the show justice. I was very nervous about this, but they have hit it right on the head. And I hope it continues this way, because I feel like this is going to be a continuation of a show I've loved for so very long. But thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you got this far into the episode, sorry, towards the end there, I started to mix things up. But again, that's what happens when you watch 2 episodes. And I've kept notes, but it was hard to tell, like, going through the notes. I had to try to jump ahead to try to read ahead to see where I was. But it'll get easier, as there will only now be 1 episode a week. And we'll break down episode 3 coming up next week as well. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. You find us over at the Screen Society Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Over on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment, and share. It helps people find the show. Rate and like us over on Spotify and Apple. Helps people find the show as well. And any other social media you're looking for, we're at the Screen Society Podcast on all socials. If you just search that, we do have different usernames on all those, but if you search the Screen Society Podcast, it should be one of the first ones to pop up. So follow us and like over there on all the socials. But again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time when we talk season 10, season 1, reboot, Scrubs 2.0, episode 3 on the podcast.